The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So I'm going to show my screen. Okay. Here we go. Hope it's visible on my screen. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for attending. We're going to get started. This webinar is about frevvo as used by our numerous K-12 and as well as higher education customers. We're going to talk about several use cases and how our customers are using frevvo. While these use cases are talking about K-12 and higher ed customers, they're really most of these things are applicable to any organization. I do see a couple of people who are not in education, but the similar processes exist within all organizations. Some quick housekeeping. The recording's already been started. We're going to do a quick overview, just a couple of slides, and then jump really into demos and examples. There's an area in your GoToWebinar panel on the right over here somewhere. You may not have all these tabs, but there's a questions tab. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask a question. You simply type it in there. My colleague Courtney is here with me, and she'll be answering questions as best she can on the fly, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for a couple of questions as well. So jumping right in, what is frevvo? What exactly do we do? Just in one single slide, frevvo is really point-and-click software that allows you to design any form you want and the associated workflow, and you can automate that approval workflow in just a matter of days. As the icons show, there are really three components to this. There's the form design. Drag and drop to design your form, works automatically on all devices. There's the routing for approvals. It might be routed to a manager, a vice president, an accounting department, HR, et cetera, the workflow piece. And then there's integration. So these forms and workflows are naturally much more useful if they can connect with and talk to internal systems, SQL databases, SharePoint, et cetera, et cetera. And frevvo provides mechanisms to do all of these things. Here's a sampling of our customers. We have roughly 800, somewhere between 750 to 800 customers. Many recognizable names in education: NYU, Harvard, Syracuse, UC Davis, and others. And we also have a number of K-12 as well as private prep schools that use frevvo. Escondido Union School District out in California, Boston Public Schools, one of the biggest school districts here, Moore County, Mansfield Public Schools, Gulliver Schools, and a variety of other school districts as well. And in addition to that, we also have a number of other customers: Ostrom, Sylvania, the lighting company, Safeway Groceries, HBO, and others. So frevvo is already in use on a daily basis by a number of customers for a variety of things, such as purchase orders is a very common one. This is where I want to buy something for my organization. I fill in a form, routes to my manager for approval. Maybe if the amount is greater than 10,000, it's got to go to the CFO, and finally to accounting. Absence records, expense reports, travel authorization. Employee onboarding is another very common one. This is particularly good in frevvo. We're actually going to take a quick look at an employee onboarding form. One of the things that employee onboarding often requires is the ability to generate government documents like a W-4, a state W-4, an I-9, etc. And frevvo is very good at doing that without having to fill in the same information multiple times. Also in schools and university settings, there are permission forms, background checks. These are situations. A permission form is, where you need to get a parent or guardian's signature in order to go on a field trip or print the student's profile in the yearbook or whatever the case may be. Transportation is another example. ROI on this is very high in many cases because, so for example, some customers have been able to reduce the number of buses that fly their districts by I don't know exactly how many, but apparently these buses cost a lot of money. So even reducing a single bus more than pays for your usage of frevvo. And then the last thing is database SQL integration. This is I mentioned this because this is a extremely common thing. Very large percentage of customers use frevvo integrated with SQL databases so that the forms themselves are very dynamic. You can reduce the amount of information that needs to be populated, and you can also, of course, update a database. Here are some examples, very recent ones of some of the projects that we have worked with these customers on. From Boston Public Schools, Central Wyoming College, Gulliver, various universities and schools. You can see there's employee onboardings, purchase order, leave approval, travel request, and Uber waiver form. But what's most interesting about it is that the implementation time for all of these workflows is small. In some cases, as little as 1 day out to maybe 10 days, 10, 12 days of time. So with frevvo, you're able to create these kinds of automated workflows in an incredibly short amount of time, as little as a matter of days. Okay. So with that, we'll just jump straight into demo and examples. So I want to show a couple of things here in frevvo. So the first thing is single sign-on with SAML. So this is essentially with frevvo, you can easily integrate with your existing identity management system. Supports integration with Active Directory, Google Apps, Okta, etc. using SAML. So let's see if we can do this. I'm going to actually switch to a different browser. One of the problems with single sign-on is that you're signed on. Let me see. Hopefully, I'm going to log into frevvo. Yeah, so I've got to log out. Apologize. I probably should have done this before. So I have to sign out of everything. Okay, and now when you go to your frevvo account, it's going to say, oh, this particular account or tenant, as we call it, is integrated with Google Apps using SAML. I'm going to reroute you to Google for signing in. I'm going to sign in here as this user, Sue. Just use your normal Google sign in, and you'll see that you then get logged into frevvo. Okay, so it's pretty easy to do. In this particular browser, I'm already logged in as a different user using the exact same mechanism. This is the designer user. And I want to stay logged in there as a designer user so I can show you some of the other things in there. Another use case here, commonly used in schools, is signature forms. Nowadays, in particular, multiple languages is also becoming important as more and more districts in the United States deal with or have to service populations that speak a variety of languages. Permission forms, address change, course registrations, transcripts, emergency contact, a whole variety of forms in here. So we have a demo space in here, and what I mean by space is essentially a portal. So we have, this is built into frevvo. You can create as many spaces, portals as you want. These spaces automatically adjust to mobile devices, so they'll look different on a phone or on a tablet. They'll look natural on those devices. They also automatically handle access control, so you will only see the items in a space that you are allowed to access. So in this case, we have these signature forms. So let's take a look at this form. This is the permission form in English. We've pre-filled some of the fields in here so that it's faster to do a demo, but it's a pretty standard form. And all you got to do here is type to sign, and you simply sign using the touchscreen on your mobile device or the mouse or trackpad on your computer. And here I've created, just simply sign this form. Let's take a look at exactly the same form in Spanish. It's the identical form, has the same fields, everything's exactly the same, except that it's in Spanish. One important note is that you're not actually creating two separate forms, an English one and a Spanish one. You create a single form, and you can then provide translations into as many languages as you want. And frevvo can either automatically display the form in the right language, depending on your browser settings, or of course, you can also force it to be displayed in a particular language. And the nice thing here is, imagine that I'm a parent filling this out. My preferred language is Spanish. I see the form in Spanish, makes sense to me. I sign it and I submit the form. But what frevvo can do is generate the underlying PDF with the necessary data in English or in any language that's necessary. So it's possible, for example, for a parent to fill out a form in one language, but for the form to then be printed out in the school office, like an emergency contact form, for example, in a different language. So it kind of serves both constituencies there. So that's a simple example. That's just a pretty straightforward signature permission form, but easy and very common in schools. You go to practically any school district's website and you're going to find a whole bunch of these forms still often available as PDF documents, or even they're sent home as pieces of paper. The next thing we're going to jump into is kind of take a real quick look at some of the capabilities in these forms. So a lot of customers, what we've discovered is a lot of our customers use our product for the dynamic capabilities that these forms have. So we'll look at a couple of examples of really dynamic forms that are connected to SQL databases. I wanted to give you a quick look at how easy it is to create a dynamic form. So things like show and hide sections, do calculations, etc., using our visual designers and visual rule builder. So it's very easy to create these things. There's no coding required. And you can use expressions and functions in a familiar way, very similar to, say, Microsoft Excel. So let's take a look at a quick example here. So in this tab here, I'm logged in as a user called Designer. And I've got a form here called Shipping and Billing Address. So a common use case where, here's my billing address. And if I want whatever I'm buying shipped to a different address, I check this box and then the shipping address shows up. Otherwise, you assume that the shipping address is the same as the billing address. So in this case, we're going to create a simple rule that says, if I check this, show the shipping address section and make it required. So let's go in here. It's like I already have a rule, so let me delete that rule. How do you do this? This kind of dynamic behavior. We're going to click plus to create a new rule. Let's give it a name. Show hide shipping address, and then you click on the Run Builder tab here, and you'll see a wizard pop up. This is our visual rule builder, and in this case, the first screen of the wizard is, well, when do you want this rule to run? You want this rule to run when the user selects the ship to a different address box. So when the user checks that box, then the ship to a different address control is filled. What do you want to do when it's filled? Well, I want the shipping address to be visible. You can add another action. I also want it to be required. So when the condition is true, I want the shipping address to be visible and required. And then what do I want to do when the condition is false? I really want to do the opposite, which is set the shipping address to hidden and optional. And click finish, and that's it. That's all there is to it. We've now created a dynamic form with a rule that has dynamic behavior. Let's try it out. And you'll see that the shipping address is invisible by default. I click yes to ship to a different address, it becomes visible. Click no, it's hidden, etc. When you're testing this form as a designer, you'll see a little debug console appearing down here. Kind of tells you what rules are firing and when, so it's easy for you to figure out what's going on. Obviously, this information is not shown when the form is deployed and used for production. So that's a simple example of a very easy business rule. Let's take a real quick look at a slightly more complicated one. We've got a table here with a list of line items. Each one has a quantity and a price, and we want to compute a subtotal for each line and then a grand total that sums all those subtotals. How do you do that? Let's take a look here. I've already created these rules, so we can just go through them. You can see for calculating a subtotal, you can only calculate a subtotal when you have a quantity and a unit price. So both have to be filled. When they're filled, you set the subtotal to the product of those two fields, quantity multiplied by unit price. You do this, by the way, using familiar expressions. So you'll see there's autocomplete and all kinds of expected behavior in here. So we're setting the subtotal of the quantity multiplied by the unit price. And if either of them is empty, then you want to set the subtotal to empty. And that's all there is to it in this rule. That's how easy it is to calculate a subtotal for each row. You don't have to worry about looping and understanding how many, doing it once for each row in the table, etc. It's all handled automatically. You can also always click on this rule code here and actually see the rule that's the code that's being generated behind the scenes. And if you really want, you can click edit code here and also actually edit the code or write your own JavaScript. That functionality is always available to you. Calculating the grand total is even easier. There's really nothing to do. There's no condition. You just set the grand total, the sum of all the subtotals, and that's all there is to it. Let's take a quick look, and you click this little button here to try the form out. You'll see that the subtotal is being calculated, and so is the grand total. Of course, there's validation automatically built in. You can have a quantity of 14.8, but you can have a price of 14.8, and you'll see how subtotals and grand totals are calculated. If you delete a row, the grand total will automatically get updated. So all that stuff just happens automatically for you. So it's very easy to create these kinds of dynamic behavior in frevvo forms. Let's take a look now at some more complex dynamic behavior. This is I'm showing this to you because it's really common. Lots of customers use frevvo forms that are integrated with SQL databases for things like pre-filling dynamic pick list, viewing specific records, reading and updating them. You can also run stored procedures in SQL. So let's go back to that space and click on employees. This is a simple database connector dynamic form, where it's a standard master detail type of form. This pick list is populated by running a SQL query. And when you select an employee from that pick list, you'll see that the bottom portion of the form automatically populates with information, details about that particular employee. Order information is a slightly more complex example in that it has, you see there's a list of orders in here, but when you select a customer from this list of customers comes from the database by running a query. When I select a customer, this pick list populates with a list of orders for that customer. Select an order, and the lower table populates with a list of line items for that customer. I select a different order, and you'll see that it populates with a different list of line items. You select a different customer, and it's a different set of orders. Select an order, and that stuff populates down below. So it's really easy to create these kinds of highly dynamic forms in frevvo. There's no coding required for this complex example, this form that looks pretty complicated, but it's very easy to do in frevvo. So that's some examples of dynamic behavior. This is the kind of these represent some of the things that a lot of customers do use frevvo for. Past that, a couple of additional examples that I quickly wanted to take a look at here is PDF generation. So this is a real common use case. Once again, we have a number of customers that use frevvo for employee onboarding, and this is a common use case across our entire customer base, not just education, higher ed, and K-12, but customers in essentially every vertical use frevvo for this kind of employee onboarding. So let's take a quick look. One of the things before I do that, I also wanted to mention here is this elimination of duplicate data entry is a big factor. You can imagine in employee onboarding, you often get to a point where you now have 20 different forms that are being filled out. Now, on each and every one of those, you're filling in the same information: your first name, your last name, your social security number, your signature, address, etc., over and over again. Makes it a lot easier for end users if they simply fill it in once and the system takes care of the rest. So here's an example of a new employee onboarding workflow. This one has multiple steps. We're going to fill in some employee information, and you can see the steps in this navigation bar at the top. We've got today's date automatically populated. Just to make life a little bit easier, in the demo, we've pre-populated a number of these fields. You'll see that frevvo automatically performs all kinds of validation. So for example, here, I can't type more than five characters into the zip code. It won't let me. The date, you can't type some junk in there. It'll automatically tell you that this is an invalid value. The date control is pretty sophisticated. You can type in dates like this. You can type in dates in a wide variety of formats, and frevvo will automatically recognize that this is a date. It'll format it appropriately. The date control also is capable of displaying the date in a variety of formats. In general, the format is chosen automatically for you depending on where in the world you're located, your browser is located, and the date will be displayed in the format that's appropriate for your location, or common for your location. Email address is another example. If you type some junk, I guess this is a valid email address. Huh? So if you type something that frevvo doesn't consider to be a valid email address, then you will get an error instantaneously. So I type a valid email address. Same thing with social security number. Frevvo will validate that this is an invalid format, whereas this is a valid format for a social security number. Click the signature button. I'm going to sign. Notice that the signature is, I think we'll ask for the signature just once and automatically transcribe it to a number of PDF forms. Click continue here. The next step in the employee onboarding is these personal allowances, a pretty familiar form for people. What's a W-4? Married, click yes, enter one for yourself. Let's enter couple of other fields in here. You'll see that the total number of allowances is automatically calculated for you. That's it, nothing else in this form. The Connecticut State Department of Revenue Services, it's pretty basic. Not sure why this is set to New Jersey. And finally, an I-9 employment eligibility verification form, again, a common requirement in employee onboarding. I can choose to be I'm a citizen of the United States, so if I choose this particular field, you'll see that a section populates down below. This is what an I-9 form looks like. It'll accept that on the I-9 form, this section is always visible and says, if you selected the fourth choice here, then you must fill this in. With frevvo, you just don't bother even displaying it unless you selected that fourth choice. So I'm going to select citizen in the United States, click continue here, and then the next step here is a summary step. Frevvo automatically generates this summary step for you. So it's showing you all the information that you filled in the various fields in the first 3 steps of the form. Just check if it all makes sense. If you want to correct anything, you can click details and go back to that particular step. Looks good to me in here, so I'm going to click continue. And in the last step, as the employee, before I submit this employee onboarding application, I can view the completed PDF documents. So when I click view the completed federal W-4, you'll see that a W-4 is generated. Apologize, this is a few years old, this W-4. But all the information is populated, the number of allowances, first name, last name, address, even my signature has been transcribed over to this W-4. So this is a valid legal W-4 that is then can be printed and submitted to the IRS email, to the IRS, however you submit your W-4s. Same thing with the Connecticut W-4. Same information is available again. Remember, we didn't have to enter any of this multiple times. We didn't have to sign more than once, but we can generate any number of documents out of the employee onboarding information. And here's, for completeness sake, the I-9 employment eligibility variation. And again, the same thing, the information is pre-populated in here without having to re-enter it multiple times. So that's an employee onboarding form. Of course, if you want, you can add steps to this workflow. For example, instead of in this case submit is disabled, we won't be completing this workflow, but you could have a send to HR step here, which then actually routes this set of forms and documents and information to the HR department so they can do whatever is necessary with it. Many customers will also route it to the IT department. So for example, if you need to procure a smartphone, a laptop, network drive permissions, database permissions, passwords, etc., etc. All of that can be automatically handled within frevvo in a single easy to use workflow. Okay, so that's employee onboarding, PDF generation. And then the last example that I quickly wanted to run through was an actual approval workflow where we're going to do some real routing. And this is I guess I think we're going to use a travel authorization. There are many examples we already talked about: purchase requisition, leave approvals, expense reports. Very common thing to do is employee fills out the form, it gets routed to his or her specific manager, then conditionally may get routed to a particular role like a department head or a VP, depending on the amount, greater than 10,000 or whatever, depending on certain conditions in the form. frevvo workflows support all of that functionality. You can route to a user, a role, or anonymously to a specific email address. You can route conditionally. frevvo workflows also support escalations, and escalations are where, let's say, you're up to the CFO for approval and the CFO doesn't do anything for 2 days. You can automatically program the workflow to send a reminder. You can send as many reminders as you want. You can also, instead of sending a reminder, automatically simply reassign the workflow to a different person. You can also reject workflows, so you can send them backwards. If I'm the manager, I don't like something, I can send it back to the employee saying, please make the following corrections. You can save and load. So a common use case, again, you have very large forms, multiple steps maybe. You can save partially completed forms and come back to them later. Let's go back to that demo space over here and take a look at this travel authorization. So once again, this is an example of the employee information was automatically populated. I'll put in an email address here, so it'll send me a sample. This is a demo, so it'll send a sample PDF at the end. So the employee information was automatically populated from the logged in user. I'm going to click next to go to the trip information and now fill out this form. So there are many validations in here. So for example, the departure date can't be in the past. I got to select something in the future. The return date can't be before the departure date. So again, I got to select something that's after the return date. I don't know. Let's go to Istanbul, Turkey, and go for university business. So I filled in my trip information. I'm going to sign this section. Click next, go to the estimated expenses section here now. So this is where I'm going to estimate the expenses that I'm going to incur. Get those approved. So let's go on Delta, it's $2,000. The mileage is interesting. I'm going to use a mileage calculator. It calculates it automatically. Let's say I drive 200 miles, car to the airport. And then let's say, you gotta eat, so that's gonna cost $500. So we've got a $2,616 estimated total. I'm gonna assign this, and at this point, we now gotta get this these estimated expenses approved. So I'm gonna click send for approval, and now this goes to the department head, a different user, Sue at frevvo.com. You might recall in this other browser, we logged in as Sue at frevvo.com, and we happen to be on our task list. If we wait long enough, this will automatically appear on that task list, but I just clicked refresh to make it easier. And you'll see how the pending travel authorization is now sitting on the task list. I can click this button here and look at the audit trail and see what happened in the past. Click on the red play button here, and the form displays. I can open up any of these sections and see where the trip, the destination, the reason for the trip, which employee is traveling, and what are the details of the expenses. Well, looks good to me. Seems like a reasonable trip to take. So I'm going to approve this and click continue. And now this particular workflow routes all the way back to the employee who can look at it on his or her task list. So now in this particular example, the workflow sits on my task list until I complete the travel. Once the travel has been completed, I've got my actual expenses. I'm going to click the play button again, and you'll see how the form has changed automatically. It's showing me my estimated costs that I had entered, and now is enabling the actual cost column. So now I'm going to say, well, what was the actual airfare? Well, it turned out there was a much more expensive flight, and food was also more expensive, whatever. So now I've got a much higher actual total than the estimated total, and you'll see a box appearing down here that says, well, looks like your actual expenses were much higher than the estimated one, so we're going to have to reroute this back to the department head for approval. But that happens automatically. Again, I'm going to sign this. The date is automatically entered for me, and then when I click on submit here, it goes right back to Sue, who's going to have to reapprove these expenses because they were too high. Now, of course, this routing happens conditionally only if the actual expenses are higher than the estimated expenses. If they weren't, it would automatically be approved and this step would be skipped and the workflow would be completed. And that's it. That completes the workflow. Once the workflow is complete, a PDF is automatically emailed to the whatever email address I entered in this form. You'll see here's the PDF, trip information, expenses, etc., for your records. Okay, so that's an example of a workflow which actually routes between multiple users. We've created, as I mentioned, showed you earlier in the earlier slides examples. We've created very complex workflows that route to any number of users. Courtney here has probably herself created very long workflows and complex ones that route to, I don't know how many steps, Courtney, 8, 10 steps in some cases, yeah. Easily. So it's pretty easy, certainly feasible in frevvo's product to create real-world complex workflows, that route to a wide variety of users. So that's a quick look at some of the use cases. Just as a quick recap, we have a lot of customers in education that are using frevvo for a variety of applications. We're able to complete those applications very quickly. Many of them use single sign-on through a variety of systems like Google Apps and Active Directory. They use them signatures. Being able to sign these forms electronically is a big, strong capability in frevvo that is used widely, especially in this vertical. They all, most of our customers, whether in education or not, really use dynamic forms. Almost all the forms and workflows we create are dynamic. Whether they integrate with a database or not, they have a lot of dynamic behavior. And then finally, things like PDF generation for employee onboarding and routing, dynamically routing for approvals, so conditionally routing for approvals are also common and powerful features in frevvo. We have a lot of information and other materials on our website. So if you go to our website, you can go to solutions, colleges and universities, and check out some videos, schedule a demo, look at an infographic. There are a number of case studies on here. You can try out some of these examples that I showed you. We also have a K-12 page which is similar. Again, you can try out a variety of examples on here. And then, of course, a number of case studies. You can find a lot of customer examples and case studies and what they're doing with frevvo here. And then finally, of course, we would love for you to try frevvo for yourself. Simply click on this Try Frevvo Free button here and fill out the form that shows up. Confirm your email address and you're ready to go. It's a fully functional 30-day trial of the cloud product. We do also offer the ability to download our product if you would like for a 30-day, fully functional 30-day trial. Certainly recommend you try the cloud first. So thank you very much for attending. Hopefully that was a fast but useful introduction to several of the use cases that customers are doing with frevvo in education. So we still have about 6 or 7 minutes. I'm not sure if there are any questions that we can answer.
Yeah, actually, somebody was asking about pricing and what is included in that price in terms of training or support.
Sure. So pricing is you go to our website and there's a pricing button. So obviously these are starter prices. The cloud system is generally priced like a electric utility. It's usage based. The more workflows, forms and workflows you submit, the more you pay. And there are a variety of plans, tiers, 1200, 2400, 3600, etc., all the way up to hundreds of thousands of submissions per year. Most educational institutions tend to buy an annual plan, and that's just because your usage is often skewed. There are peaks in certain months of the year. What's included in addition to the annual fee? Generally speaking, we'll sell a launch pack that's included with our product, and the launch pack is provides you with a discounted rate. Provides you with, a set of hours as well as training at a discounted rate. We offer a variety of training programs from new user and advanced user workflow training classes. They're roughly once a quarter. Those are roughly 3 sessions, and each session is maybe 3 or 4 hours long, all delivered over the web. And in addition to that, we also offer very regular mini training classes. Each one of those is about 3 to 4 times a month, roughly 3 times a month, I would say. They're generally on Tuesdays, I believe. And there are, again, web sessions delivered. There are sessions delivered over the web. Each one's about 2 hours long, focusing on areas that customers find useful. So there are many training sessions on business rules, connecting to your database, how to design effective forms, workflows, et cetera, et cetera. And customers who purchased a launch pack have unlimited access to those training sessions as well. You can get more information here, get help and training, and then finally clicking on group training here, and you'll see the available training classes at this point.
And then the other question was for, schools are very busy, IT departments and schools are very busy, and they may not have the time to build out their projects for them. What opportunities do we provide for client services or building projects for people, that sort of thing?
Sure. So the question was, IT departments at schools are very busy. Can we help build your forms and workflows for you, essentially? Absolutely. That's not just true of schools and universities. It's true across the industry. Everybody is, the IT departments everywhere are simply underwater. So that's one of the big positives of frevvo. Not only do we certainly offer client services to help you build your forms, as I showed you in one of these slides here. We've done a number of those for customers. We're very, very good and very efficient at doing it. You get these forms and workflows built for you very quickly. And then also important to note that frevvo is really designed to alleviate exactly that situation. It is a low-code platform. Almost everything you do in frevvo is visual. You drag and drop to create forms. You drag and drop to create workflows. You use wizards to create visual rules. Most of the configurations are done with wizards. Integrating with a variety of systems is also accomplished using visual wizards. So there's very little coding that you have to do to use frevvo. So it's also very common within our customer base to have sort of citizen developers, if you will, people who are not necessarily coders by trade, are the people who create these forms and workflows. But absolutely, we offer a full suite of client services, and a really efficient and great client services team that can help you build your forms and workflows for you.
And do you have any forms or flows that are kind of ready to go out of the box that we don't have?
Yeah. So the question was, do you have any pre-built forms and workflows that we can use as starting points, essentially, right? I'm paraphrasing. Yeah, there are, obviously we have hundreds and hundreds of forms and workflows that we built. But when you sign up for frevvo in the cloud, you'll see a number of templates that are provided right here. click on this more template apps, and we haven't put tons and tons of them here intentionally, so you don't get lost. But there are the most common examples already provided here, and simply click on any one of these, like expense report. I'm going to click this install button here, and you'll see that the workflow got installed for you. And then also there's a help tour that guides you through that workflow, how to use it, and what tips, essentially online tips that walk you through using that specific workflow. In most cases, these templates will not have routing built in, because as you sort of saw, you might have to switch browsers or log out and log back in as a different user to actually route a workflow between multiple users. So these templates are designed to make it very easy for you to try these workflows. And then, of course, you click on edit, and you can now edit this workflow and modify it to suit your specific needs. That it? All right. Well, thank you very much. We're pretty much almost exactly on time. Thanks very much for attending. Hope you found it useful, and feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks.